Good evening and welcome to another episode of Rich Politics with me, your host, Richard Taylor. Thank you so much for taking the time to tune in, and don't forget to subscribe to all of our social media platforms. Well, tonight's discussion, we're going to be looking at should MPs be afforded personal security at the expense of the taxpayer. This, of course, is in light of the recent murder of the MP David Amess, who was brutally murdered in his own constituency. And to discuss that with us tonight is the former head of Royal Protection for the Royal Family, Dai Davies, or David Davies, I should say. Dai, welcome to Rich Politics.
Also, good I should say good evening.
Good evening, yes, good evening. Dai, I just want to ask you, of course, we've heard the tragic news of the death of David Amess MP for Essex, where he was, and of course his beloved Southend, where he sadly was murdered. And he was murdered. You know, many people on social media saying he's died or passed away. He was brutally murdered. I mean, there's a question going around, and I was listening to a number of commentators this week discussing whether or not MPs should be given personal security at the taxpayer's expense. What do you think about that?
Well, a lot of people have asked me that over the last few days, whether MPs should be given police protection. I don't think it's feasible, possible, or most of them would actually want it. But what does need doing, obviously, is reviewing the whole system structure, from their personal security to their homes, their families, etc., etc. And you will know very well, my son is a specialist crime prevention officer, so people like him should be the ones giving advice, certainly in terms of protecting them at home. What has to stop, I think, is having these meetings in church halls and these places which haven't been properly secured, haven't got any kind of support in terms of security. In terms of what can be done now, and there is a short, medium and long-term strategy which I would be implementing, and I'm sure the Home Secretary and others, the Speaker, are actually getting on with doing that. The first one is to issue every MP with a police-style radio. As you may or may not know, each police officer now has a radio, and if he presses, or she does, a red button, they get immediate. It is one of those immediate calls where other colleagues drop everything, and I think our MPs deserve something like that. So it's not beyond the realms of reason. Certainly when they're in their home patch, they pick up a radio, they get the batteries and whatever else is required these days, and they carry that with them. And that's the price, if you like, the minimum, I would say, in terms of protection. Secondly, yes. I would... Go
on, Dino, carry on.
No, and secondly, there are about 10 things I would be implementing. The problem is all police forces in this country and chief constables vary hugely. Some are very good, some are appallingly bad, and most are somewhere in the middle when it comes to protection. The other thing is there aren't that many expertise. So in this business of really protecting. Royalty protection officers are particularly good. They're very, very expensive, and it's simply not affordable for them to be deployed or people like them. So we have to look back. And what I would be suggesting is that there is a better liaison in some forces between the force, and whenever they're having surgery, you either have a patrolling officer nearby, or at least the control room is aware and that proper security has been carried out, and where possible, if there is a risk, i.e. somebody has done a proper risk assessment, because some MPs, most of us wouldn't know who they are. Others are high profile, and the very high profile ones, who tend to be big media profile, whether they're left or right, they attract attention either from the left or from the right, and that can attract then the kind of lunatic. And these people are given a label of terrorists. They're lunatics. Let's get that clear. The man who killed Joe Cox, calls himself a terrorist, was a nutter and a complete. And yet we give them, you know, I'm sure the IRA, because I hated them as much as anyone, but they were real terrorists, and so are some of the, you know, far Middle East ones. They're real terrorists. These people, lone wolves, are mainly lunatics, and whether it's in Norway, here, or anywhere else, let's get this clear and stop giving them a status they don't belong. Anyway, so I'm prattling away here, but yeah, seriously. So we can do a lot more, I think, without having the costly, should we have policemen and women with every MP.
I think it's important to note, I was listening to Mr. Nigel Farage this week and suggested that maybe ex-military veterans, for example, who've been trained in security and, of course, how to spot terrorist threats, that there might be a market there for those people who are out of work to be employed by MPs, to be protection, for example, because, of course, this happened in the constituency, Dai, not in Parliament, which is, as you well know, is very, very well protected through CCTV, through officers who are armed. But of course, in the constituency, MPs are more vulnerable. And I wonder if we've seen a real shift in society, a change where we're seeing more knife crime now than we've ever seen, like in London and Birmingham, in some of our major cities. I think society has changed. And of course, we're going to talk a little bit about this, the online media world as well, where people throw insults to one another and people can do it, you know, anonymously and nobody knows who they are. Do you think this has added to the whole change we've seen in society and, of course, made MPs more vulnerable?
Well, to answer your first point, do I think military personnel can be employed? Well, Mr. Farage himself has used private security companies, but clearly he was as high profile as anyone. And again, if somebody wants to lay out the funds, or their party does, because of a particular individual, but I think if the risk is so great, then the police should be doing it. And I come back to it all revolves around the risk. And every MP really now should sit down with their chief constables or the Metropolitan Police, whoever, and let's work out a proper risk strategy so that key areas can be looked at. And where there is any kind of issue, then appropriate measures are taken. And of course, since Joe Cox, a huge amount of stuff has been done. But as with all things human, if you don't keep it up, it laxes. And I suspect there was a degree of laxity, sadly, over this issue, particularly because this poor man had warnings, had threats, as most of them do. We live in a toxic age where members of parliament throw insults at each other. That's got to stop. That's within the ability of the leaders, and they're such weak men and women these days. I doubt if everyone got the gumption to say, no, you won't call the opposition misogynist, racist, and all the rest of it, because it simply isn't true. There are some horrible people in Parliament, and we hear them occasionally, and they should be told to button it, in my humble opinion, and they do nothing to stop this lunatic, cowardly fringe who use social media, as you say. The social media platforms have got a lot to answer to as well, and they need to shut down as soon as they see these vile comments. Aren't there some cowardly people in this country, horrible people in this country? They abuse MPs, women, children, you name it, and I'd be locking, you know, there'd be so many prisons in this country full of these people. And, you know, as a society, we're surprised at these attacks and knives. Do you know why? Because after 2, 3, 4 years, we let them out again. We let young men who are thugs, who've stabbed somebody, out after 5 years. We let rapists out. And then we're surprised they actually go and do it again. I beggars belief. I know nobody would want to live in the state I would control, but there we go. These thugs,
I think people would feel a lot safer, though, Dai. People would feel a lot safer if they did.
Don't get me going on commissioners and police commissioners and the failure to tackle knife crime and any other kind of crime. It is appalling at the moment, the state of policing in this country. But again, that's another subject. Let's hope that somebody gets their act together. But equally so, you've got to keep a sense of proportion. You know, there are 650 MPs. They do meetings every day of the week. It is a part of their job. In the same way, you know, police officers, in my opinion, are not protected well enough, and they're the ones who rush to that scene. Yeah, if they'd been stabbed, the miscreant, if he lived, would probably have got about 10, 12 years, and he'd be out again. Yeah. So we need to get a grip in this country, one, on criminals, two, on the criminal justice system, which is appallingly poor, and three, generally, as citizens, we need to step up, the ordinary ones, and get these MPs to get some legislation. But I've been at this game, as you know, for 52 years. It's got worse, and it's getting worse. And I'm afraid I'm full of despair of those leaders, both in the police and in any capacity these days, to do the right thing for us.
Yeah, I mean, some people have suggested, of course, this wasn't a politically motivated attack in the sense that this guy wasn't from the right or the left. He was from Somalia. He obviously lived in over here and had family over here. Some have suggested, and I'm not suggesting this, but I've heard it said that maybe some of the issues are around the problems we have with uncontrolled illegal immigration, which is still a problem, which still hasn't been dealt with by the Home Secretary. Over 16,000 people so far this year have come in through the Kent course. I wonder if there's a connection there, and I'm not making that connection, but I wonder if these people coming over are being radicalized or radicalizing others is part of the issue and a conversation that we need to have at some point.
Well, we certainly need to have a conversation about why so many are allowed. I simply don't understand why the French authorities don't tackle those who supply the rubber dinghies or the boats. I mean, there is only so many rubber dinghies in France or anywhere else, and you need to have a license and who you sell it to. So it just beggars belief to my mind why we're not tackling the sale of these boats. There are hundreds of them, and they're coming from somewhere, aren't they? So we need to tackle that. But on a serious note, yes, it could be said that there is a problem with some of those coming in. But frankly, we've got enough of our own problem of nutters in this country already. We certainly don't need any more. But I say again, this man, I think, was British born, actually. He had been on some kind of watch list. But again, there are 20,000 plus. There are 4,000 to 5,000 active people that we're trying to watch, but you can't. As you may know from your career, for me to follow you for at least 20 hours a day will take 16 officers.
Yeah.
Plus vehicles. It's a hugely expensive operation, and you can't do it. So somebody somewhere has to make judgments, and that's the problem. We've got too many already here. You're quite right. Perhaps we shouldn't let quite so many in without vetting them properly. But how, the statistics show out of those 16,000, I suspect 15,500 will be allowed to stay here.
Yeah, I mean, it is obviously, it's not for this conversation another time, maybe, Dai, but certainly on the protection side of it. So you wouldn't advocate because of the cost implications. And of course, as you mentioned, 650 MPs having private security. I mean, it would be a massive burden to the taxpayer as well, wouldn't it? And I think solutions around constituencies being protected, for example, church halls you mentioned, where they meet with the public, maybe by appointment only, which I know some of them already operate on that scale. And there are things in place. The Speaker of the House, Lindsay Hoy, has called for a review of the whole issue around it. But so what you're saying is, with your experience, trying to provide private personal security to every MP is not it's not viable, is it?
I don't think so. And again, with great respect to the military, they're trained in all manner of things. Sorry, my phone is going. Sorry, I'll try and switch it off. With regards to military personnel, as we saw with Princess Diana when she died in Paris, she was protected by two very good ex-soldiers, but they're not police officers, and they don't have that requisite training, many of them. Some do, in fairness to them, some do, but the number of military men and women who are trained in close protection is very limited, and so it isn't feasible. And the other thing is, unless you practice daily or weekly defensive techniques, particularly if you're not armed, you fall out. I mean, I can still remember some of my moves if I had to, but it isn't feasible. And the other thing is, we've got to keep a sense of proportion. Police officers are attacked every day, and it's only by luck and good fortune that some of them aren't stabbed and murdered every day. The statistics on attacks, both on the police, on ambulance service and other services, is horrendous. So we've got to keep a sense of proportion. This was awful. My heart goes out. But there are 650. They're in and out every day, and this last one was 5 years ago of a murder. So we again, I'm sorry to say, have to keep a sense of proportion. Sadly, in a lunatic society as we've got, these things will happen. No matter how much your security, it will happen. And there's no such thing as 100% security. That I can assure you.
Yeah. Well, Dai, listen, it's always a pleasure to have you on to get your thoughts. But before I let you go, anything about Prince Andrew? Any thoughts on Prince Andrew?
I don't think we've got long enough, have we?
we have discussed this before on another show, remember? But I just wondered, with all the papers being given to him and stuff, and is he going to turn up to court in America?
Well, I doubt whether he'll turn up. That's the first thing, because if he does, he'll be hit with so many subpoenas by lawyers acting for the 45 different people involved in these allegations. What I would say is I'm very disappointed that the Metropolitan Police have carried out 3 reviews, but a review is not an investigation. A review merely looks at the facts as given at a certain time and place. An investigation goes further, and it investigates and witnesses and interviews key witnesses. They haven't. And so how you can say, where an allegation which is that he aided and abetted, counselled and procured the trafficking of a female for sex into this country isn't a criminal offence is beyond me. The other factor is, if you or I commit sexual offences against women who are being forced to have sex with us anywhere in the world, we can be tried in this country. So those are clear factors. I mean, it's a bit like the BBC. They reviewed Bashir. There's clear evidence there of forgery. Yet the Met, in their wisdom, and I've been vocal about it, decided not to investigate. I don't care who you are. If there's an allegation made, and she has made an allegation of rape, let's not say he's a witness, and I know he denies everything, and he says that every other word, and every other broadcaster says, but he denies it. Well, he would, wouldn't he? Whether if he's guilty or not. If he's not guilty, he's had 10 years to prepare for this. Him and his very expensive lawyers, played by his mother. I mean, I just beggars belief. There's one law for one lot, and there's another one for the rest of us, and I'm just peed off with it all.
Dai, always a pleasure to have you on Rich Politics, and I hope to get you on again very soon.
You take care, my friend.